Well, I also think that this is a terrific book, which is a good thing since I wrote a blurb for it. So it would be a bad thing if I got up here and said, yeah, now I've read it, I really don't like it. I think it, for a lot of the reasons Brad talked about, but I would add one more, which is we get a lot of rhetoric about public-private partnerships. I mean, my God, we've heard about public-private partnerships for 30 years. What David does is really take that concept beyond the event, the single project, the sort of nice rhetoric, and put it into this idea of a network that is an institution. And I think that's a real contribution beyond all of the contributions that Brad talked about, which I will not reiterate. I do think there are some issues. I think they're a little bit more serious than maybe David and Brad think they are. I am not still sure that there is a great consensus for affordable housing. And maybe this is because I'm a Washingtonian, but I noticed that the Millennial Housing Commission, I went to when they released their report, I've never heard a more apologetic bunch of people in my life. It was essentially, we worked really hard, we wrote this great report, we think it's wonderful, but we don't think anybody's going to pay any attention to it, and they were right. The overwhelming push for home ownership, where just sort of the notion that affordable rental housing was meaningful and important got lost. That rental housing, never mind affordable rental housing, was important and meaningful got lost. The virtual total lack is changing a little now, but at the beginning of the whole Fannie-Freddie debate, and we're still at the beginning, no one's talking about their incredibly important role in multifamily housing. And in fact, I think to the extent people are talking about it, it's only on the tax credit side, whereas in fact their portfolios were extraordinarily important. The fact that David talked about, that we still have a sort of, a housing, an underhoused problem that doesn't seem to go away, that really does seem to be intractable. And, there's a piece of me, the cynic, I mean, I'm from Washington, who wants to say what there really is a consensus for tax credits. I think it's a little better than that, but I don't think we have this grand political consensus for affordable rental housing. Second, and Brad has mentioned this too, I do think we do have a problem with geography. Fresno and the NSP has really brought it home. So Fresno and Las Vegas are poster children, but you almost could include the entire southeastern part of the United States with a couple of rare exceptions. The people I know who work in on the NSP program, just pull their hair out at what's gone on in Florida. So I think that this geographic lumpiness is a really serious issue. And finally, I do think we have to ask ourselves how portable is the concept beyond affordable housing. Affordable housing has some pretty important benefits. It's got a dedicated tax credit. At least in the past, it had 2 whole and a half, if you count the Home Loan Bank system, GSEs supporting it. And the structure is relatively large, sophisticated real estate projects that attract people with substantial and significant financial and business acumen and produce collateral. That just isn't quite the same for charter schools and healthcare. And I notice David's only East Coast picture was an East Coast charter school, and I was talking to Jonathan Cabell earlier today about the question of whether these real estate providers for the charter school system really do exist on the East Coast the way they do in California. The answer is not really. So I think that we got a long way to go, and the question is, do we just have a long way to go, or are there really substructural problems? But the questions I want to raise, which are might be unfair since this book was basically put together before all hell really broke loose, relate to the impact of current affairs on the network. So let me just go through those. I don't have answers. But here are some major questions. The first is that the tax credits have proven to be a more fragile instrument than we thought, not just because the recession reduces taxable income and thus appetite. If it were just that, we could overcome that. That's not a big deal. But because Fannie and Freddie were supporting the program heavily, not only by buying about 40% of the credits, but also by asserting a fair amount of sometimes unwelcome and inflexible quality control. We're clearly going to have a major tax overhaul here after 2010, and given the pressure on deficits, tax expenditures are going to be at issue. And I think we need to face the question of whether tax credits really continue to be the best way to go, and if they are, how will we find new buyers while retaining the discipline that knowledgeable investors provided. Second, the future of Fannie and Freddie is anything but clear. They were major players not only in the tax credits but also by buying multifamily loans, and in the case of Fannie, heavily supporting some of the intermediaries. Neither the multifamily activities nor the intermediary support are getting much attention, and as to the latter, I would say the signs of re-upping it in the context of whatever happens to Fannie and Freddie are not good. So what happens to the network without them? Third, it is, of course, not just Fannie and Freddie that have uncertain futures. The entire financial services industry is going to have to rebuild. And two trends in particular raise substantial questions for the network. The ever-increasing consolidation in the banking industry, from which much of the financial support came, mainly incented by CRA, and the freezing and caution in the securitization markets. When those markets unfreeze, plenty of risk will be taken, but prior experience suggests that neighborhood economic development risks will be at the bottom of the barrel, and withers CRA and community development in the context of financial services reform. Fourth, having a wonderful, dynamic new HUD secretary, and all you people at HUD must just be really happy, an administration that cares about lower-income people and communities, a focus on breaking down stovepipes, especially HUD, DOT, energy, HUD, education, and thinking regionally, and a stimulus package and a 2010 budget that include a good deal more money for these issues than has been the case for a long time is just great. Now, one might be tempted to ask how this embarrassment of riches will affect the network, like, will it get flabby? But I actually don't think we need to worry about flabby. I think the question is, how will we keep the excitement and energy and interest going and effective when the money comes to a crashing halt in 2010? Fifth, state and local economies and budgets are in horrible shape. The stimulus bill provided some respite, including through the NSP, but where is the local support that's so essential to the network concept going to come from? Sixth, foundation support has been important both intellectually and financially. They too have been hit hard and are pulling back on grants. But again, the real question in my mind is continued interest and intellectual ferment. The money will come back if the interest is there. And finally, the intermediaries in this network, especially the CDCs and CDFIs, but also the community and regional bank players, are being mightily challenged by the current financial environment. I got an email today from someone who's involved in this, who had been talking to somebody else, the head of a CDFI, and a regional bank had just, after a 10-year relationship, multi-millions of dollars involved, had just said, we're not renewing. That's 15% of that entity's budget went poof. And why? Because they had lost $100,000 on one project. This is not an isolated incident where I know of another CDFI where one of their major bank lenders went under. The next morning, they got a call from the FDIC saying, sorry, remember that commitment? Anything that was unused on it is no longer available. And the terms, when there are renewals, are getting much tougher. So while some will emerge stronger in terms of system and management for the same kinds of reasons, its strength came out of the problems of the network, that generated the network, all will be financially more challenged. Some will disappear, and others may become larger and geographically diverse in taking over their portfolios. And how does that play into the localness of all of this? And some may find themselves with a reduced appetite for innovation and risk-taking. In other words, they may become bureaucracies. So how will that affect the network? Is there a new group of intermediaries coming on the scene? In short, what's the next stage of evolution or revolution?